Forget about the stories you've read in history books. Our food customs are our most direct connection to the world of the past. This is history that you can touch, smell, and above all, taste.
It's London.
The rituals of breakfast, lunch and dinner are something I think we take for granted, as if they have always existed as they are now.
I think I'd have preferred it fried. You'd have a heart attack by lunchtime.
But unpick the stories of our three main meals and you discover gastronomic revolutions, technological leaps and sometimes gruesome realities.
Decay is also going to cause really bad breath.
Yes, I think I've had boyfriends like that.
I never miss a good meal, but food is about more than just filling up. There's a rich and complex history to our daily meal times, and that's what I'm setting out to explore.
Right, dig in.
I believe lunch is the most important meal of the day. It's the workhorse meal, the one we use to refuel. But for most of us, it's just a quick pit stop squeezed between two slices of our workday. People eat it in a speedy average of 12 minutes, 49 seconds, barely even noticing their food. You certainly won't find me eating like that. I believe passionately in proper cooking and taking time over a decent meal. We've lost our relationship to food and the time it takes to prepare and eat it. In the not-so-distant past, we respected lunch as we had done for centuries. In the 19th century, chophouses like this one in the heart of the City of London were where hungry urban workers came for refreshment. This is one of the last remaining authentic chophouses still serving traditional Victorian food. I've come to sample it with historian and fellow lunch enthusiast A.N. Wilson.
Oh, look at that.
Oxtail,
Fantastic.
red cabbage to share,
Oh, very nice, thank you.
and the chomp chops. Thank you.
Oh, I say,
This will keep us out of mischief, won't it? Well, me, anyway.
you've got about 4 times what I got.
Why did chophouses start emerging all over London?
In the 19th century, London is becoming more and more the commercial centre of Britain.
The empire.
And Britain is becoming the centre of this enormous empire throughout the world. And so there were more and more people crowding into London just to work, who hadn't had breakfast or hadn't had very much breakfast, and there was a long time till dinner. They were working in London for long hours.
Yeah.
And by the middle of the day, your tummy was rumbling. So you wanted a chop, as I would jolly well do today, actually. I'm enjoying it myself.
And it would have been a mutton chop rather than...
It would have been a mutton chop. This is a lamb chop. But you can't have everything in this life, Clarissa.
I mean, a chump chop in mutton terms would be much bigger.
It would have been a much bigger thing because it's both sides of the bone. All the same, this is extremely good.
By the mid-19th century, the Industrial Revolution had triggered a gigantic social upheaval. Suddenly, the big city beckoned with new kinds of labouring and clerical jobs. People responded by adopting new living and working patterns.
Many of the people who worked in the city came here from the suburbs or even out of London by train every day. They could come on the railway for the first time. Commuting had begun.
Of course.
The Victorian chophouse lunch focused heavily on generous portions, and quite right too. A belly full of protein would get you through the afternoon. Victorian office workers were allocated a full hour for their lunch break. I had the same when I worked at the Inns of Court, and provided the restaurants are efficient, it's enough time for a relaxed meal and far preferable to eating at one's desk.
That sausage looks very magnificent.
Would you like some?
I'll take a little off.
Have some.
Chop houses served an ordinary or fixed-price menu with little or no choice. Nose-to-tail eating, that's eating every part of the entire animal, was very common for the cheaper dishes on offer.
What I'm having would have been probably one of the ordinaries of the day and one day of the week, because oxtail is awful, you know, it's very cheap.
And delicious.
It is absolutely beautiful.
I mean, the thing about these places is they are for the middling sorts of focus, just our way to call them, and lower classes, lower middle classes, really.
The speciality of the house is a secret recipe of stewed cheese.
Bring on the cheese.
Oh, I say.
There we go.
This dish was a chop house staple and a version of what we now know as Welsh rabbit.
Fantastic. I think this is a very, very old way of eating cheese. I mean, they'd have mixed it up with a bit of beer and a bit of cream or something, wouldn't they? Some mustard. Absolutely delicious.
Very nice.
Of course, the funny thing is, here we are having a reconstruction of a 19th century lunch, but one thing that you probably wouldn't have had as a Victorian lunch would be a woman. Wonderful it is to be having lunch with you. I'm afraid if we were having an authentic Victorian experience, we wouldn't be here.
But I might have squeaked through because I was barrister, and barristers are gentlemen by statute.
You're a gentleman in every sense of the word, if I may say so.
So kind.
The Victorian chop house was drawing on a long tradition of eating well in the middle of the workday. In medieval times, food was, by necessity, prepared and eaten during daylight hours. The main meal dividing the workday was then called dinner and was taken earlier, around 10 a.m, after 5 hours of work, followed by a light supper at 4 p.m. The word lunch at that time didn't even exist. Daily life revolved around the time-consuming demands of hunting, growing and cooking food. I've come to the Weald and Downland Museum in Sussex to meet historical food specialist Caroline Yeldham. She's cooking me up a selection of dishes from a typical medieval dinner menu.
Hello. Hello. Caroline, how nice to see you. How are you?
Lovely to see you.
I love your setup.
Thank you.
Brilliant. And what have we got cooking here?
We've got a pottage. Pottage just means something cooked in a pot. And it's got onions and garlic and carrots, mustard seed and pepper in there at the moment. And also a ham hock.
Delicious. And they would have eaten pottage most days?
Yes, of all ranks of society. If you're poor and it's your main dish of the day, then a very basic one, up to very refined, elegant pottages made with wine and almond milk and saffron. And we've also got a joint of mutton.
Oh, good.
Being poached, or boiled as it was called.
Oh, look at that. And of course it would have been mutton and not lamb, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Sheep were the wealth of this country. You raise sheep primarily for wool. That's a dominant clothing throughout Western Europe. The wool churches of the Cotswolds and Suffolk show just how much money was made from the wool. So you didn't want to slaughter your animals too young.
Smells delicious.
Good.
There's a common belief that people in the Middle Ages ate badly, which included not eating vegetables. This is complete nonsense. It may come from the fact that there are no vegetable recipes from this time. I think that's simply because people took cooking them for granted.
I mean, my mother used to keep a dinner party book, and you never found what vegetables they ate with whatever was served, because it was what came out of the garden.
Absolutely.
People in medieval times relied on a bountiful living larder. They foraged for plants we consider weeds and grow a range of vegetables, including garlic and purple carrots.
Carrots weren't orange then, were they?
There are various kinds of carrots. There are white ones, which were for animal feed, purple ones, which we've got some here, and there are also what were referred to as red roots.
We know they had access to spices to flavour their food, but that's given rise to another popular misconception.
I mean, there's this ludicrous idea that crops up as well, that, they used all these spices because the meat was rotten.
Spices cost a fortune. They cost shillings a pound. And the only spice that actually will cover up the taste of rotting meat properly is chilli.
Which we didn't have.
Which we didn't have because it's an American spice. It's an absurdity for people who haven't really thought about food.
These are rather nice. I don't really like orange carrots, but these are rather nice.
They're less sweet, aren't they? And they're a wonderful colour. Medieval people loved colour.
The basic rhythms of life, including what you ate and at what hour, were ordained on high by the Catholic Church. Meat was only permitted on half the days of the year. Otherwise, if it wasn't a fast day, the popular substitute for meat was fish, which was eaten in great quantities. The wealthy ate it fresh from fish ponds and rivers, while the poor mostly relied on salted fish. Food wasn't considered just nourishment, it was also medicinal. People believed the body was composed of humours which needed balancing by both herbal remedies and the way food was cooked.
There were 4 humours, weren't there?
There are earth, air, fire and water, which are reflected in black bile, yellow bile, phlegm and blood in the human body. So part of a cook's job, as well as a physician's job, is to provide somebody with the food that will balance their humours and bring them to perfect health. So that fish should be roasted to balance out the wateriness of the fish. So you want to make it hotter and drier. Whereas the mutton, being earthy, you need to make it more watery, so it's being boiled or poached.
A cooked meal at 10 o'clock in the morning would be so welcome after a good 5 hours of physical labour. If you've ever had builders in, you'll know that many still follow this tradition by downing tools mid-morning to disappear for some egg and chips after an early start. The wealthy would enjoy eating several courses, but the poor would probably only have one. I don't believe in holding back. I'm going to try all of them.
So begin with the pottage.
Begin with the pottage.
Smells lovely. That's good, isn't it? So obviously we've got the ham hock, which would be a bit of a luxury, wouldn't it?
Not really. Most people could afford to keep some pigs, so they would have meat available, cured meat, over most of the year.
There were official lunch breaks for labourers. Meals were eaten communally and lasted over an hour. As a former trade union official, I thoroughly approve of that. If you wanted sea fish, it was a luxury, and people went to extraordinary lengths to get it. It was landed on the coast and transported around the country.
There was a contract between the merchants of Whitby and the merchants of York in the 15th century to get fresh fish to York within 24 hours of being landed in Whitby, which meant they set up relay stations for ponies and carts going over the North York moors to get down into York, yes. The labour and the work was worth it for the premium prices being paid for fresh fish in York. And the fish were transported wrapped in moss and probably alive.
That's amazing.
It is.
It's really very nice. And I love your green sauce.
I do try and convince people medieval food is good food.
They don't need to convince me, but this is particularly nice. And it's right, isn't it? You wipe it on the tablecloth.
If you must, you would normally have... How about my apron?
I was only joking. The meal would always end with something sweet that was considered medicinal, a way to close the stomach and aid digestion. So, the pears.
So these have been cooked in some water and a little honey and some sweet cecily to stretch the honey, because that was quite expensive stuff.
I think this diet, based on fresh, wholesome food, is how we should all aspire to eat. Well, instead of saying grace, I will just thank you for a really delicious feast. The benefits are all mine.
Thank you.
This large main meal, we then called dinner, was eaten in the late morning, the middle of the workday, for the next couple of 100 years. I'm leaping ahead in my lunchtime journey to the early modern period of the late 17th century. The Catholic strictures were replaced by Protestant Puritanism, but with the restoration of Charles II to the throne in 1660, Britain enters a period of great social change. Food becomes more about taste and style than balancing humours. The middle classes are emerging, and although most people still live on and eat off the land, more people are embracing city life and consequently new work patterns. By this time, the main meal is creeping later in the day, eaten any time from 11 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon. Samuel Pepys, one of my favourite historical figures, was a civil servant in London. He was a gourmand, a man after my own heart, and his diaries shine a fascinating light onto what a man of the middling sort enjoyed eating. In January 1660, he writes, "My wife had got ready a very fine dinner, viz. A dish of marrow bones, a leg of mutton, a loin of veal, a dish of fowl, 3 pullets, and a dozen of larks, all in a dish." But it was venison that was the prized meat of the age. Nobility had a total monopoly on it, owning all the parks in which the deer were hunted. To eat it, you had to have connections. Pepys revels in his access to it, mentioning it in his diary 76 times. I've come to Cumbria to join food historian Ivan Day, who's going to bring some of the dishes from Pepys' diary to life. Ivan, hello. It's been a long time. How are you?
It has too long. I'm very well, thank you.
Wow, that's a smashing bit of meat. What have you got there?
It's a bit I've cut off of a haunch.
Of
venison, of course. It's the choice kind of meat of the period of Pepys. Everybody wanted it, particularly the merchant class who were aspiring to be like their social superiors. And this is a particularly fine piece. I'm going to bake it in pastry in what was called a pasty.
A pasty at this time wasn't the cheap small snack we know today, but a large, elaborate creation.
Can you see how tender that is?
Isn't it beautiful?
Wonderful. In the 17th century, people weren't fussy eaters. So, for instance, bones were left in. A modern chef would probably remove that sinew. I'm going to leave it for the diner to sort out themselves.
But also, I mean, if you're going to cook it, say slowly, presumably the silver skins will melt down and help with the juice.
Absolutely, yeah.
What type of pastry is this?
Well, this is pasty paste.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite a strong pastry because it's got to stand up to 2.5 hours baking. And it mustn't leak either. If we lose all the gravy, our pasty is ruined.
Ruined.
So it's really got to be sealed in.
From the medieval period, pie and pasty cases were rather wonderfully called coffins, and by Samuel Pepys's time, intricate designs were all the rage.
This is what we're going to make.
Good Lord.
This is a design for a venison pasty.
Magnificent.
Isn't it wonderful? By a pastry master who had various schools in the city. And he claims to have taught 10,000 ladies how to make wonderful pies and pastry. You know, this is the 17th century equivalent to designer trainers. I mean, everybody wanted to have food like this. I'm just going to trim this round so that we have our base.
Everyone wanted to eat venison, but it was so exclusive that cookery books offered recipes to fake it by either soaking mutton in blood or marinating it in red wine. The ingenuity in these recipes leaves me gasping, though I can't condone hoodwinking people into believing they're eating something better than they actually are.
This is more typical of the sort of pasty that Mrs. Pepys and her maid would have made in their London kitchen, but we know that they didn't have an oven, so they sent it out to be baked. And that was often where the problem started, because some bakers, they might have a lot of different people's pies and pasties to bake.
You wouldn't get your own back.
You might not get your own back, or they would burn it, or they would undercook it, so it was taking a little bit of a risk.
Yes.
But in London, not that many people had ovens. They sent it to...
Really, there was
baking.
place fire risks.
Well, exactly, yeah. There we are.
Look at that.
The thing that these people had, which we don't give ourselves nowadays, is time. And to produce something like that, it's going to take quite a few hours of whittling away in a cold room, away from the heat of the fire so the pastry doesn't spoil.
Nothing of the slaughtered deer would be wasted. The offal, known as umbles, was traditionally given to the chief huntsman to distribute among the beaters and peasants, being deemed far too inferior for a noble palate. It was turned into umble pie, a dish which didn't acquire its derogatory meaning, humble pie, until the 19th century.
Fantastic.
It's a mark of Pepys's ability to move through social classes that he happily eats the best cuts of meat along with the offal. In July 1662, he writes, "I, having some venison given me a day or two ago, and so I had a shoulder roasted, another baked, and the umbles baked in a pie, and all very well done."
Marvellous.
Perfect.
Much as he loved venison, Pepys also ate more modest tavern food, such as dried neat's tongue, a neat being any kind of bovine.
The neat's tongues that were the most favoured, the ones from the young animals. Stuart diners were, in fact, serial infanticides. They loved anything young, so they ate suckling pig. And suckling pig was a pig that was still at the mother's teat. They ate baby pigeons, of course, peepers. They ate baby rabbits. But everyone ate tongue. But they also ate lips and noses and palates and all sorts of other bits of the animal, which now just go into dog food.
Nose-to-tail eating was common then, as was preservation of the slaughtered animal if it couldn't be eaten all at once.
Very early on, people realised that salt was something which you could preserve meat with. The recipe we're using is incredibly fundamental. It just involves 3 ingredients. One is the tongue itself of the beast, saltpetre, which was either potassium or sodium nitrate, used in the gunpowder industry.
Indeed.
But it was discovered that this prevents you from getting botulism. But what it does also, it creates an incredible bacterial phenomenon where it makes the meat go red. So that red colour that you associate with bacon and tongue and ham is created by this stuff.
The final ingredient is salt, which gets rubbed in over 19 days. The tongue is then left to hang over smoke to dry.
What you end up with is something that looks like a cross between a kipper and one of those shoes that they find in archaeological sites.
Absolutely it does.
And it's a wonderful mahogany colour.
It's a lovely colour.
And they're called dry neat's tongues because they are really dry and they're quite hard.
Yeah.
Now, what we have here is one that I cooked for 40 minutes. I just boiled it. We're going to cut that up into little dice. In the original recipe, which is from Robert May's Accomplished Cook of 1660, so perfect for the restoration, this has to be cut up into little pieces about the size of a 3-penny piece.
Robert May worked as a cook for noble families, and his book was a compendium of popular recipes offering many suggestions for midday meals. Our diet was strongly influenced by the British East India Trading Company, established in 1600, whose reach made cloves, pepper, mace and nutmeg, imported from the Indonesian Spice Islands, cheaper and more available.
Let's get this over here.
I'll bring the caudle.
Yeah. And we're instructed by the master cook Robert May to rub some garlic onto the plate. Garlic was not a common ingredient in 17th century cookery.
No, that's true.
That'll make a nice background flavour on the plate.
While only a small section of society had access to venison, everyone on the social scale would have eaten dishes like this that were much cheaper and easier to prepare. I always think we are far too fussy nowadays in rejecting less obvious cuts of meat. Wealthier people would accompany their meal with a salad to show off ingredients imported from afar. The London Pepys knew was a world in flux. He saw both the Great Fire and the Plague. He was also part of a dynamic time when men could rise through patronage. Taverns were where deals were brokered and life played out over a midday meal. Pepys came here in April 1668. To the Cock Ale House and drank, to eat a lobster and mighty merry. It was moved here from across the road to make way for the new law courts, a former professional stamping ground of my own. They brought the fireplace with them, and Pepys remains one of their most famous diners. From his writings, we know what Pepys ate at home and what he ate while out networking. Have a look at the stag. He's magnificent.
Oh, it's beautiful.
See his antlers, and there's his body, and he's sort of bursting through the greenery, getting away from the dogs.
Terrific.
Historian Lisa Jardine and I are tucking into the pasty Ivan baked for us. She's going to tell me more about Pepys's dining patterns and the business lunch culture of 17th century London.
That's a fairly intimidating bit of venison there.
Well, you don't have to eat it all.
I don't have to eat it all.
There you are.
Good. Now, I think that's what Pepys's plate would have looked like.
None of your salad rubbish.
None of your salad.
That's really good, isn't it?
Good. And that's benefited so much from being cooked in its coffin.
That's right.
Because venison can get so dry, but that's not even slightly dry.
And it's had, when it was cooked for a good couple of hours and then transported and then heated through. I mean, it's delicious.
It's fantastic.
So, Pepys eating venison. You had to be well connected, didn't you?
He's by birth related to aristocracy, and in a patronage society, that's enough to get you going. I think the reason that Pepys's diary has so much about food in it is that the dinner, this 3-hour gap in the middle of the day, is part of his social aspiration and his mobility. It's also part of his working life. He works for the Navy office, he's close to aristocracy, and what they eat is a sign of how elevated they now are. The whole of Pepys's life is about connections, and the food is part of the connections to people with the ability to move you higher on up the scale.
And Pepys never missed an